Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I have a little confession to make. As I was reading the readings for this morning over the past week, I prophetically, I'm hoping, not perversely, focused on the alternate reading for the Old Testament reading, the reading from Ecclesiastes. So I just want to say a couple of things about that, because I'm so happy to have that reading, to have heard the reading from Hosea. The reading from Ecclesiastes seemed to be very negative, very pessimistic. And one would wonder, why do we have to hear something that is negative, something that is pessimistic? I have enough about my own life, or, the life of our country, the life of the world. I don't want to hear it in church. In fact, some people have actually wondered why that book is even in the Bible. But I guess what I want to say, in short, is that underneath all of that pessimism, that seeming pessimism, is what we eventually heard in the reading from Hosea this morning, and certainly in the gospel reading, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute, is that our strivings should always be focused on God. We struggle in life, all of us. Everyone struggles in life. But when we keep the focus on God, we will be lifted up. We will be healed. And we need to remember that our strivings are rich and they are meaningful, that everything about our lives are very meaningful when we always center them on God and keep them in God's good hands. So then we have this gospel story, which is probably familiar to most of us. It's a good one. It's really good. It's really in two parts. You can imagine, you can kind of picture yourself there maybe, where Jesus is talking, he's preaching, teaching to a crowd, and then somebody, some heckler, some person yells out, settle this argument with my brother. It's a statement of greed. Many people perceive that as a statement of greed. I want my inheritance. I want what is coming to me. And so we hear kind of a surprising response from Jesus. It always surprises me. In a sense, he's saying, I don't want to hear this from you. This is not what life is all about. And Jesus goes on to tell a parable. The second part of that reading that we just heard is a parable that is really familiar to all of us, most of us. And Jesus is saying, in life there are two kinds of wealth. There is the wealth of possessions and goods and all that stuff, and there is the wealth of God, of having a life in God. And what Jesus is saying ultimately is, go to the wealth, focus on God, focus on the wealth of God. That is not easy. That is one of our human struggles that we do have. Most of us do have at some point in our lives, is always keeping our focus on God, on how rich our lives are and can be when what we pursue after is ultimately about God. And that's what we hear, what I heard in that Ecclesiastes reading, that our pursuit is made beautiful, is made perfect when we have God right in the center. And that's what Jesus is pointing out to this man. I mean, we don't know what happened to that man. I can imagine they took off. We don't want to hear that. But we want to hear that. These are words that we want to hear. We want to be reminded of what is most valuable in life, of what our priorities are, what our priorities need to be in order for us to have a God-focused life. That they shift from time to time. That the meaning, sometimes we think, what kind of meaning do our lives have? They have beautiful meaning, absolutely beautiful meaning. And Jesus is very clear in reminding saying you shouldn't have any money, you shouldn't enjoy life. He's not saying that. He's just saying make sure that you know the difference between the two, and that ultimately there's just one